So welcome to today's session, Admin Excel Part 2. I have just dropped in the chat for you the link towards Isabella's presentation, and off we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex, and welcome. I know that there were several of you who attended Part 1 in Excel. As Alex have mentioned, this is going to be recorded. So if you have already registered, you're going to be receiving an email link with all the slide deck information, as well as the recording as well. So let's get started. Just so you know who we are, Cobblestone Collective, we are a group of educators who are very passionate about sharing what we love and what we're learning, and we truly enjoy co-learning and co-exploring various tools with you. So very excited that you're joining us on Part 2 with Excel. So I see that there's a lot of people from different places today. Where I am from, Toronto, I just wanted to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also wanted to acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas, as well as the Chippewa bands. So thank you so much for joining me on this lovely sunny afternoon. Sorry, Susan, who's in Iqaluit. Yeah, and I'm Isabella. I was also with you if you have joined us with Part 1. Those who have not joined us, I'll do a little bit of an overview of what we have covered, so then you at least know what we went through. And we're also going to be doing a couple of revision type tasks as well that we've learned from Part 1, just so we're repeating the same skills over and over again, just because it's not like, oh, once you know basic Excel, you wouldn't use a couple of those things that you've learned, because with Excel, there's always reusable, transferable skills constantly. So what's on tap for today? Today, we are essentially just going to go over what is a pivot table. We're going to be practicing how to prepare our data so that we can definitely use those data and convert that into a pivot table. And then we're going to be analyzing that. So in addition to pivot table, there's also another tool that we can use that's called pivot chart. So if you haven't really seen or heard how we can do that, that is basically what we're going to be talking about. So just looking at what we're going to be working through today, just on a scale from 1 to 5, like how comfortable are you? Have you heard about these things? Or how are you feeling? Just let us know into the chat button there. Okay, Valerie, level, that's okay. So we're going to be going through very slowly as well. 3, okay. Awesome. Perfect. So don't worry, because you're going to have access to the recording. So you can always review whatever we went through today as well. Awesome. I see that a lot of us are within the 2 or 3 range, so hopefully this will be another helpful session for you. So before we start, I just wanted to go over what is a pivot table and why do we sometimes want to use a pivot table. Essentially, a pivot table simply summarizes large amounts of data. So as you can see on the right-hand side, I don't know what happened there with the squished image there, but basically I have a very, very, very large spreadsheet, and you're trying to convert all of that data into something that's a really bite-sized summary. So a pivot table allows us to do all of those things in a couple of clicks, and we can actually see our information in a digestible, user-friendly manner. So that's what we're going to be trying to do today. So before we start, I really like practicing things that we're learning together. So make sure that you are downloading this Excel file. And Alex is going to be dropping the Excel file link onto the chat. It is just thecc.page/dlexcel2. If you are comfortable with working on your on the Excel on the desktop version of it, you're more than welcome to do that. However, we're going to be focusing more on the browser version. So we're going to be working on Excel online. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to get yourself sorted. You're going to have the view only option for your spreadsheet. Make sure you make a copy of that. And I'm going to show you how we can make a copy of that as well. Thank you so much for joining us. For those who are just slowly getting ourselves sorted, we are going to get started on an Excel file. Alex has just dropped in the chat, the link to that Excel file into the chat. It is a view-only file, so if you want to work on it online together, just make sure you have a copy of that as well. So let's get started. With your spreadsheet here, in order for you to make a copy of that, you're just going to try and find File, which is on the top left corner. In File, you're going to hover over to Save As, and you're going to save as the first option. If you save as the first option, it will allow you to work on that copy online. If you're more comfortable with the Excel on your desktop, you're more than welcome to sort of download a copy and then work on that on the desktop version. That being said, that the browser as well as the desktop version, depending on whether you're on a Mac or on a Windows, is slightly different. So we're just going to be focusing online, so at least you know that everything is the same. Once you get yourself sorted, we're going to start by going over to our preparing data.
So as you guys are getting ready, just let us know in that chat space if you are able to get your own copy of that Excel spreadsheet that you can work on. And once you've got that Excel spreadsheet that you can edit, let us know in the chat space. I'm in, I've got it, or no, I'm lost. I don't know where we are. I don't know what I'm doing. Let me know. Let us know. Okay, Valerie's got it. Great.
Navy's
in. Got it. Julie's got it. Mercy's got it. Good. Everyone seems like they're good to go.
Amazing. Alrighty. Okay, so as you can see, we have a very, very large data. How can we tell? If you start scrolling, you realize that it's sort of like there's no end to this data. So imagine this: you are in a team, you're given a spreadsheet that's full of raw data, and you're asked to analyze it. So before we start, we want to make sure that Excel is interpreting it the way we want it to interpret. So in order for it to be interpreted as a table, we want all the data to be next to each other. So as you can see here, we have an empty column in column E. I've highlighted in column E. So I can actually just delete that, because what's happening now, Excel is simply interpreting the first 3 columns, skipping that, and then interpreting the other column as a separate data entry. So I'm just going to click on E, and then I'm going to right click, and there I have it. I have the option to delete columns right there. So I can actually just delete that. So I can keep doing that by selecting multiple rows as well as multiple columns to delete. I know that column A has no data. I can just sort of scroll down to see. I'm confident that there's no data. I'm going to just delete that column as well. And I want to also make sure that all my data is in the top left corner there. So I'm going to click on my first 3 rows. If I hold on to Control on my keyboard and click on multiple rows, it allows me to select multiple rows. So I'm clicking on row number 1, hover Control, and I'm able to select multiple rows. And then now I can right click and I can delete rows there. So I've deleted almost majority of the empty rows as well as empty columns. But I'm now kind of like going through the table, and I noticed that at the start of this table, so here, here, and here, there are 3 empty rows. Again, Excel is smart, but it's not that smart. It needs to ensure that all the data is next to each other. Otherwise, it will just interpret them into discrete data files. So Janine, make sure that you are having editable access. So you have made a copy of your Excel spreadsheet. So to double check that, just take a look at the top right corner. Do you have editing, or are you viewing right now? If you're viewing, then you have to go into File and Save As to make a personal copy. So then you can start editing. Awesome. Yeah. So we're just going to we're just simply getting rid of empty rows for now. Preparing our data. And once we have deleted all of our empty rows, just let me know if you're okay. You managed to edit the first tab, which is preparing data. And we got all of our data to the top left corner. And let me know, and we can help you as well. Perfect. Amazing. For you, it is an active editing. So Shireen, double check to make sure that you are saved as a copy, and then to ensure that you are editing, you also want to make sure that you are in editing mode and not in viewing. Perfect. Yeah, Alex just sent a screenshot there. So in order for us to get to that menu, we're going to go over to File, Save As, and then we'll see the Save As option right there. Okay, so we got rid of all our empty rows, empty columns. Next thing is, I see that, the heading is it's okay. It's exactly what it's supposed to do. But let's just say you're going to be sharing this piece of data, this spreadsheet to somebody else. They may not understand your shorthand. So AMT, I know that this has to talk about amount. So I'm just going to spell it out, and I'm going to change that into amount. In addition to that, I also noticed that column B, I have a very, very long heading, and I'm not able to see everything. Instead of resizing the column, I also want to wrap text. So if in the home menu, if you select wrap text, it will allow you to retain the column width, but then you can see everything that's within that heading. So I've changed the name for my heading, amount. I went from AMT to just spelling it out. And then I also learned how to wrap the text without inserting additional tables or inserting in additional rows, all that. And we're okay?
So far, it looks so good. The people that were having trouble have managed to get in. So it looks like we're doing okay.
Amazing. Okay, and then the next thing is I wanted to talk about is it's number formatting. So as we can see, so like our first column here is a date format. Excel is interpreting as a date. How do you know? If you hover over 1-January, it's actually telling us the full date. It's giving us the date, the month, the year. And looking at the amount here, it's also interpreting as an amount by adding the unit, the $ unit as well. But it's interpreting as a value. So Excel, again, has two different data sets. So it has text-based data as well as number-based data. If it's a text, then it's always going to be left aligned. And if it's a number, it's always going to be right aligned. So over here, I just really wanted to format my amount of $ to be unified, because right now, if somebody looks at this, it might be really overwhelming because the $ are all over the place, and you might skip out a couple of numbers. So the fancy thing is that, so what we're going to do right now is just to click on column D, because I know that entire column is going to be amount, and I'm going to right click there and hover over to number format right there. And if I'm in number format, I know that it is looking at amount. So I'm just going to go to custom because I want it to look a certain way. And Excel has plenty of different customizable number format that you can play around with. But I just wanted to show how this is going to look like on your spreadsheet. So again, we're just clicking onto column D, right clicking, heading over to number format. And we're going to scroll all the way down to custom to play around with how we're going to format our data. And if we're scrolling down all the way down in custom type, we're going to click onto this option. So I'm just going to pause onto this. If we are all the way down in the menu, it is the fourth one from the bottom up. You don't need to understand how this means. You don't need to memorize what this code is. I just wanted to show you so then you know, oh, it's all the way at the bottom on the custom menu and the fourth one up. So once we click that, if you click on OK, you'll see that all of my amounts in column D now has the unit that's left aligned, but all my numbers are actually right aligned. So this is a really nice way of just sort of visualizing, well, visually organizing your data by keeping the units a certain way and then the numbers another way. So I'm just going to repeat what we just did. I know that column D is amount. We're going to right click there, number format, go to custom. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and it's the fourth one from the bottom. And that will allow you to keep your $sign unit on the left, and then every other value is on the right. So it's just to, you know, ensure that your spreadsheet is easily interpretable. Okay, and if you have followed us in part 1, you know that this is simply a long list of raw data. So we're going to try and convert this into a table. In part 1, we learned that if you type Control A in anywhere within the table, it will automatically capture all your data. So that's why it's really important for us to have the empty rows and the empty columns deleted, because otherwise Excel wouldn't be able to capture all of our data. So we're going to just click on any cell and then Control A on your keyboard. And then we're going to go into the top right corner there to look for Format as Table. And I can just choose a particular format. I'm going to do green or blue. And Excel is smart enough. It knows that it's going to have headings. So now you know that it is alternating banded rows. It's formatted as a table. I know that because there are various filter or sorting function arrows that I have access to.
So let us know in that chat space if you have a table that now looks like Isabella's. Let us know when you've got to that step.
Awesome. Perfect. All good. Amazing. And that's it. So that's how we're going to prepare our data. Make sure that there are no empty rows, empty columns, and make sure our headings make sense. If you want to go fancy, you can also format the numbers in a different way. And then you're ready to prepare your pivot tables. So we're going to go on to our next column there, next spreadsheet, conditional formatting. It is purple in color, conditional formatting. Okay, so we're now on our next spreadsheet here, conditional formatting. We're gonna highlight a couple of things. So I want to only highlight numbers that are over $50. So if I'm hovering over to column D, I can go over to conditional formatting, and I'm gonna highlight rules. Anything that is greater than 50, that is going to be highlighted green for me. If I select OK, it will highlight all the values that is above 50 for me. So the reason why I want you to get comfortable with conditional formatting is because there are different ways that we can demonstrate conditional formatting. So let me know if you're able to do that. Just highlight, play around with equal, less than, all of that. We're just going to be playing around with the amount column. If we're all good, then we are, yes, perfect. Well done. You're all such troopers. Okay, perfect. That's it. So conditional formatting, we went really into depth in part 1. But now I really wanted to bring your attention to the icon set that we have access to. So if we're going to the next tab over, icon set, which is yellow. We're going to be doing the same thing, going over to our conditional formatting, but instead of highlighting cells, I actually really want to use a symbol to represent what's happening with the numbers. And particularly when we're talking about counting the total number of absences or counting the total number of like the funds that's been raised or like budgeting, you can actually use all these different directions. So Excel has all these different symbols that represent various things. If I'm highlighting that entire column, going into conditional formatting, going into icon set, and I'm going to just be using the directional arrows. As you can see, Excel is simply interpreting what the data is doing. And how does it know that $50 is a downward trend? Is that it simply calculated the average of all the values within column D, and then it spits out that icon for you. So according to all the monies that's been spent in the entire year, according to this spreadsheet, $50 is about below average. And if 120 is also below average, and then you notice that, oh, 252 is about average. So that's basically how Excel interprets it using icon set. So you can use different icons to represent different things. You can use the check mark or cross icons, but basically using icons is a different way to highlight various data without highlighting the cell. Just because once you have, oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that was great because for last when we were talking yesterday or Tuesday about like absences and things, you could use that to say like, is 3 absences for the whole year average, less than average, more than average? It'd be a great way to find that super simply by using the icon sets.
Exactly. And what I wanted to say is that, once you have formatted your data table, Excel made it like very beautiful. And if we go back to a previous cell, when you started highlighting different cells, it kind of breaks that formatting. So if you really like the way Excel has formatted your data table, then you can choose to use icon set instead of using the highlight function. And let's just say, you're really not keen on this icon set. You can always go back to conditional formatting and then clear rules for the entire sheet, and then you're back to your data table right there. So I'm going to go back to my column D, conditional formatting, and I'm going to be playing around with icon sets here, and I'm just going to use various indicators. Whatever indicator that best represents your data point would help you visualize it. Awesome. Alrighty. Okay, so now we're going into our pivot tables. So we're going to go straight into our pivot table tab here, which is green in color. You'll see that the data has already been done for you. It's all in your data table, and it's green banded. To create a pivot table, all we have to do is go into data on your menu bar. Data. Sorry, it's insert. Okay, we're going to go into insert, and there you have it. There is a pivot table option there, and you're just going to click on that. So Excel is smart enough to realize that you're trying to pull all the information that you've put in from that table. That's why it's very important to first prepare our data, convert that data into a table, so then Excel knows exactly where all that information is coming from. So just double check the source is from my table. Once you're okay with that, select the check mark. And then it's going to ask you where you want to put your pivot table. So it says create your own pivot table and insert on, and I want to insert it on an existing list because sometimes that's a lot better for you to sort of visualize your data. So I'm going to select existing list, existing sheet, and then I'm going to select this cell. Do you have to highlight? You don't have to. You can just, actually that's it. Yeah, you don't have to highlight the table at all because Excel knows that there's a data table right there. So if you're outside of the table and select insert pivot table, it knows that you're trying to capture everything that's within that data table. Insert pivot table, existing sheet. Yep, exactly. And then you can just click on a blank cell that's on the current sheet. So any blank cell. And then you'll see that it's correctly clicked if there's a dotted box around that particular cell. Let me know we're okay so far. So we're on pivot table sheet. I can just click on any cell within the data table, insert pivot table, existing sheet, and I'm clicking on an empty cell. Click on an empty cell. Yes, perfect. Okay. Now that you have your pivot table, now that there are a bunch of different fields. So fields for pivot table essentially are your data sets. So we need to get used to understanding what fields mean. Essentially, whatever your headings are, that's going to be your field. So in this case, we have 4 different headings. We have date, name, department, as well as amount. That's how Excel is interpreting as potential data sets. So we can click on any of those fields. Let's just say we selected amount. The Excel is smart enough to realize that if you have selected amount, you probably want to calculate the sum of all the amount. So the pivot table, if you only selected one field, so amount, it will only provide you with the sum. And you can obviously change that if you're in the bottom right corner in value section. Instead of the sum, you can change it or you can completely remove it. So I don't want to display the amount anymore. So I'm going to go into the value section and I'm going to remove that field. And I'm back to the blank pivot table, and now I can play around with it again. I don't want you to combine fields yet. Just take a look at how the pivot table looks like if you're only selecting one field at a time and how Excel is interpreting that data. So if I selected date, it's actually interpreting every single day as one data point. And I'm going to just remove that. If I selected time or name, it's interpreting, oh, it's pulling out everybody's name and there's only 5 distinct names. It's showing me that. If I click on department, it is also going to collate all the different departments. And as you can see, it automatically creates an alphabetized list of my values. So of everything that's within that field. And if you selected amount, it will give you the sum of the amount. Let me know if that's okay. We know where to select our fields. We know how to delete a field and playing around with all of that. You can put it into the chat.
Let us know if you're following along, if this is making sense, we're not getting overwhelmed. Let us know how it's going with the pivot table.
All good. And once you're ready, I just selected amount because I just wanted to have a simplified version of a pivot table. And what's great about a pivot table is that you can have multiple pivot tables in your spreadsheet. You can only have one raw data, but pivot table, because you're analyzing the data, you can have multiple analysis of it. So let's just say I have the sum of all the amount that I have spent in a year that's already been summarized here. Instead of asking the person to scroll all the way down to the spreadsheet, I now also want to break it apart. I want to show the person exactly what department has spent how much money. So I'm going to go into the next tab there and going into the row field tab, row fields. So now we're going to add additional rows. to our pivot table instead of just having one field at a time. So same thing, we're going to be inserting our pivot table. So we're going to go into Insert, Pivot Table, and it knows where the source of our data is. And then we're going to select Existing Sheet, make sure that it's an empty cell that you're going to be putting in your pivot table, and then select Insert. Because I want to see a breakdown of every department and how much money they have spent, I'm going to be selecting Department and Amount. And if I scroll before I say, okay, this is a pivot table that I want to display, I'll see that, oh, all my departments on the left-hand side, and then the amount of money that they've spent is on the right-hand side. And in addition to that, I also have a grand total. So it's not just a separation of all the different numbers. They have collated it, and they also have created a sum number for me. And once I'm ready for that, I can actually just select. I just cross it out, and then there I have it. I have a permanent pivot table that's on the right-hand side to my raw data table. If you have made a mistake, this isn't a table that you want, you can actually just highlight this entire table and delete it, and you can recreate your pivot table again. So insert pivot table. I want to analyze two different fields, so you can just select any other field just to see if the pivot table makes sense, because you don't want to be adding all the different fields to the pivot table if it's not exactly the kind of analysis that you want to have. I'm going to select name and amount this time. So I have, oh, Alyssa has spent this amount of money, and oh, I can see that like Michelina has spent way this amount of money, and then the total right there. And I'm okay with that, so I'm just going to get out of my option for pivot table, and then that's it. And there I have it. And you can, as I've mentioned, you can always insert more than one pivot table. So now I'm going to be inserting a different one with departments. Insert department and amount. And I can see that I have another pivot table right there. So it provides different options. Oh, yes. I believe Alex is going to be sending you the Excel spreadsheet. We're just in the row fields section.
Yep, I'm sending that your way.
Awesome. Alrighty, we're good. So this is just simply analyzing two different things. So we have some adding multiple row fields. So these are the different rows. Essentially, they are different data points. So within the name, it's pulling out all 5 unique names. Within department, it's pulling all of the department names. I have count amount instead of sum amount. Okay, let's see what you did here. I'm just going to delete. Insert pivot table. Existing list. So, Julie, if you're still in the getting your pivot table sorted section, if you're selecting department or amount or even just name and amount, if you go into the values section in your pivot table backend, and then go to downward arrow and then press on the value field settings right there. Value field settings. And then you can actually have different options to be shown. So instead of the sum of the funds, you can also count how many entries there's been. You can also create an average. Yeah, exactly. And you can also show the value as a different thing. If you have a particular formula that you want to do, yeah. Cool. Awesome. Perfect. So that's it. We're only analyzing two sets of fields at a time. So department amount or name and amount. Obviously with pivot table, because everybody talks about it, so clearly we can analyze more than just two different fields. So now we're going to be adding them into our column. So if we're going out to our column section, moving on to our other spreadsheet there, into our column fields. So we're going to moving on to our column fields. So same thing, there's a data table there, and we're going to be inserting our pivot table. So make sure you're adding your pivot table, and now we're going to select two different things. Again, we're going to go back into our name amount. I'm going to select, insert, pivot table. And it knows that that's my data table, inserting it in an existing sheet. I selected a blank cell, insert. With column fields, the reason why we have to play around with different fields is because we want to see what's the best way for us to visualize our data. So let's just say we selected department and amount. Excel is smart enough to realize that, oh, maybe you want department within the row section. So that's correct. And let's just say you start inserting name. It will automatically populate all that data within row. But that's not a really good visualization thing, because if you take a look at the pivot table with underneath academic programming, there's different people and their expenditure. What I want to do is to break it apart by creating additional columns. So what I'm going to do is drag the name field all the way to the column. And there I have it. My table is now elongated rather than extended. So I can see the breakdown within every department and who has spent what money in that department for that money. You can play around with it. Let's just say I want my department in columns instead and the names in rows. So then it will provide a different representation of your data. And once you're okay with that, again, just exit out and you can see what that analysis looks like. And let us know if you're able to do that, just combining it and dragging and dropping the field items. Perfect. Amazing. Vicky, you're on the ball. And I'm going to wait. Again, we're just simply inserting pivot table, and I'm clicking three different things. And I'm just playing around with the fields by dragging and dropping them to different parts of the table. Dragging and dropping. And once you're okay, just exit out, and then there you have it, your pivot table.
Okay, looks like a couple of people said they've got it. Let us know again in the chat if you're following along. Hopefully everything is going easy for you. All good, great.
Amazing.
That's what we want to hear. Good.
Perfect. Alrighty, the last part of our pivot table is obviously using that filtering function. So we're going to go into our filters in pivot table section here, and we're going to combine everything that we've learned into this pivot table. So again, we have our data table here, and we're going to insert our pivot table. So just go into insert pivot table, and you can add your own pivot table onto the existing sheet. Make sure you selected an empty cell so that you can paste your pivot table there. And I'm going to add name, department, as well as amount in that pivot table. I want to make sure that the name is within that column section. And once I am ready with this pivot table, I am actually going to try and add a filter. Now you can add the filter on the back end. So for example, I only want to select names that begin with, actually no, departments that are from athletics. Let's just say I want to only look at athletics. So I'm only displaying anything that's related to athletics. If you're creating a filter view within this part of the pivot table, you can't change it. So I wouldn't suggest you to do that. What I suggest you is to first create your pivot table, exit out, and then go within your pivot table to change the way you're viewing. So you can change the way your pivot table is being organized by using the sorting and the filtering, all that good stuff that we've learned in part 1 there, because then the table is dynamic, it's not fixed. So always add everything in once you're satisfied with the way the pivot table is looking out, and then you can just start playing around with the label or the value filters within the table itself. So I'm just going to go and change my row. Label filter begins with A. I only want to look at departments that starts with A, and then I can see how this table looks like. And if I don't want that, I can always clear that filter and it will go back to my original pivot table. So you can always play around with the filters. Sorry about that. So you can actually see, oh, I also want to take a look at anybody who spent more than $500. Then again, it's only going to be displaying the column filters like so. So always play around with the columns and make sure that you are getting what you need. Like that. And let me know if you're able to sort of play around with the columns. You can also do sorting. You can sort it in ascending or descending order. Remember that when you're doing sorting, you can apply that to both values as well as text. So you can do it by alphabetical order or by increasing and decreasing value. So I can do that with the amount, and I can also do that with my letters, my text. And let us know if everything is okay so far. Perfect. All good. And that's all for pivot table. We've learned how to create our pivot table, how to play around with the fields and pivot table. Now, still, pivot table still looks like a data table because there's still text, there's still values. So it looks very similar to your own data table, but now it's more like a summary view. For those who are visual learners, such as myself, I find that the pivot chart is an easier interpretation of the data. So a pivot chart, as long as you know how to create your pivot table, you can easily create a pivot chart from there. So essentially what that means is that you have to first create a pivot table. So we're now into our pivot chart spreadsheet. Just taking a look and comparing between the two, we know that the left-hand left-hand table there, that's a data table, and then the right-hand table, that's pivot. And the reason why this is pivot table is because if you highlight it, you'll see that there is an option that's called pivot table that's popping up for you, and you can also edit the way it looks like, change the colors. And in addition to that, with a data table, you know that if you were to add something next to the column, that's what's powerful about a data table, is that it basically allows you to add as many rows or as many columns because you formatted your data into a table. So now that you have your pivot table that's all set up from the data table, all you have to do is click onto any cell within the pivot table, go into insert, and just select anything. So let's just say I want to select a pie chart to represent all the amount that has been spent this year from different departments. And I immediately am able to see a breakdown with this pie chart. You can choose different ones as well. You can choose a column and it will show you the breakdown. Essentially, a pivot chart is basically pulling out data from your pivot table. This is just a different way for you to visualize your data, especially for the visual learners like myself, instead of just asking somebody to read through a table as well. So pie chart is one of the easiest ways to represent data. However, if you're trying to measure trends, then you can use a different type of chart. So play around with that and see if you're able to insert that chart and copy and paste it, put it in a different spreadsheet. Let me know if that's okay. Alex, do you often use charts or graphs in Excel?
No, but you know where I do use them? I use them in PowerPoint a lot. Because it has a very similar functionality. You do build it off of an Excel spreadsheet, but then you can just pull it right into PowerPoint, because usually I'm the one doing the presentations that require the overall view, the data that the pivot table provides. So for me, I use the charts a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And what I love about it, because this is a chart that you just created, all you have, if you wanted to edit this, you can just click on the image again and then go back up to the chart menu, and you can actually select a different type of graph. And then Excel will try its best to do its own interpretation, whether it is bar or column, whatever you see fit. Then you can play around. You don't need to reinsert a new one, delete it. As long as you're clicking onto the image, it would allow you to edit the image, the chart.
How's that for everyone? Are you able to turn your data into a pivot chart versus a table? Let us know. Also, maybe you can share in the chat a way that you can see yourself using pivot tables in your specific role. So depending on whatever role it is that you have with your school district, school board, how could you see using these specific tools that we learned in Excel today in the role that you have?
Yeah, definitely. I'm very curious to know as well, because I don't have to analyze that much data, thank goodness, but I can definitely see that there's a huge use for, say, like school-wide data, whether it is, just simply ordering forms or like different clubs. Are they like semester based or are they annual? Yeah, all of that. Nice. Oh, that's amazing. I would love to see that. Yeah, pivot tables. I wish more people knew about that, or it's like within the curriculum. So yeah, thank you so much for teaching that. Alrighty, our next So that's it. So we've learned a lot today. We learned how to get into our conditional formatting, learn how we can apply the icon set to our data. So there's a different way to visualize our data. In addition to that, we know how to summarize the large amounts of data using our pivot table. In addition to that, we also know how to create our pivot chart from our summarized pivot table data. And the last thing is, the reason why I wanted to focus on the browser section, the browser version of Excel, is that sharing function. So always remember that you can create a template like the way I've done for you all, is to just share it with people, people's email addresses. So double check with your IT. In my school, I'm unfortunately unable to share it with anybody with the link. I can only share it with people's particular email addresses, and I can also allow or disallow editing. If you don't allow editing, you can also block people from downloading. So when it comes to sensitive pieces of information, you want to make sure that that spreadsheet lives within the school district or domain, and it's not being copied or downloaded and passed around. So that's a really important piece. In addition to that, you shared it with your team members. You also want to make sure what major changes occurred. So there's a wonderful way for you to track your changes. If you go into review on your menu, there is a section called show changes. And then it will pop up this menu here on the right-hand side. It will show you exactly who has edited what at what time. So this is a really nice overview. Whether you are sharing it to your team or whether you're sharing it to your students, you can see if all the students have participated on this particular spreadsheet. If not, then you can also double check. You can filter the changes as well. You can filter it to a particular spreadsheet. So I only want to look at the first spreadsheet, then I can see what's happening there. Does Excel Online have all the same functions? Yeah, Alex, I think you can talk more about that because I use a Mac.
Yes, I'm going to just drop in a link to the Excel Online versus Excel Desktop. As you can see, we can now even do pivot tables online, which wasn't the case before. So Excel Online has come a long way. Yes, there are some differences, namely like the file type and the things that you can include, but for the most part, the functionality is very, very similar, but I just dropped a link in the chat there to compare the two.
Yeah, definitely could do VLOOKUP on the spreadsheets. We didn't focus on it today just because it might be too overwhelming with VLOOKUP and PivotTable, just because they provide two different views of your data. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more or just having that conversation, I just wanted to show you our help desk there, where it's full of people like myself and Alex who are just basically behind that help desk, answering all the questions and troubleshooting various things that you might need. Oh yeah, VLOOKUP is available online. It is all the formulas that you would use on desktop, you have access to it. And just so you know, if you have any, if you have any issues, if you have any questions, just let us know, and you are more than welcome to send us an email. And make sure Alex is going to be putting down a survey form into the chat because we'd love to know whether these sessions have been helpful for you. We want to make sure that we are helping you as much as we can. So if you can let us know how you found these sessions, that would be great.
I'm just going to drop that in now. My screen just froze, so I'm going to get it back. Yeah, we're going to drop in the chat space a survey link. So to let us know how you found the session today and even on Tuesday. Was this helpful? Do you see yourself using this? Let us know what you thought. Here is that feedback link. It's just the cc.page/feedback. And then we also have that support email as well if you do need help. Our email is help@thecobblestonecollective.ca. So if you need us, we are people behind there who will actually answer you if you do need help. So there is that for you. And then you can also see that Isabella just put in a code there for you. That code just gets you credit for having filled in and participated in the session today. And where you go in to enter that code is education.microsoft.com.